Who let him in? Petty Officer First Class Tyler Brennan's voice cut across the morning air before the old man had taken 3 steps past the edge of the training compound. Conversation slowed. Heads turned. Beyond the fence, the Atlantic wind drove hard off the water, snapping flags above the buildings while the steady hum of a helicopter rolled somewhere beyond the hangars. Walter Mercer stopped on the gravel. At 82, he looked painfully ordinary beside the men watching him. His white hair was combed back beneath the sun, his faded olive field jacket hung loosely from narrow shoulders, and an old brown leather satchel rested against his hip. No ribbons, no navy cap, no polished trident announcing that he belonged here. Brennan walked toward him with 2 younger SEALs trailing behind, their boots grinding against the gravel. "Sir, this isn't the visitor center." Walter looked past him toward the obstacle course, where a training group moved beneath the bright Virginia sky. His gray-blue eyes followed them for several seconds before returning to Brennan. "I know where I am." One of the younger men smiled. Brennan didn't. He was 30, broad-shouldered, disciplined, and accustomed to people answering quickly when he spoke. Something about Walter's calmness irritated him more than confusion would have. "Then you know this is a restricted area?" Walter gave a small nod. "I do. So what are you doing here?" The old man's hand settled lightly over the leather satchel. Its surface was scratched and darkened with age, the brass clasp worn almost smooth. "Keeping a promise." The younger SEAL behind Brennan gave a quiet chuckle. Brennan glanced back, then studied Walter again. "A promise. That's right. To who?" Walter's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not fear, not uncertainty, something older. His gaze drifted toward the distant water. Someone who waited long enough. Brennan exhaled through his nose. "Okay, let's try this another way. Name? Walter Mercer. Appointment? No. Someone expecting you?" Walter paused. "Maybe." That earned another laugh. Walter didn't react. He simply turned his attention toward the training field again. A whistle sounded. A group shifted position. Walter's eyes narrowed slightly, following something Brennan hadn't noticed. "They're pushing too early," he murmured. Brennan caught it. "What did you say?" Walter watched for another moment. "Nothing important." Brennan stepped closer. "Mr. Mercer, you're standing inside a naval special warfare facility carrying a bag nobody has checked, telling me you're here because of some mystery promise, and now you're studying my training area. So either you start giving me straight answers, or your visit ends right here." Walter finally looked directly at him. The wind tugged at the collar of his faded jacket, but the old man's eyes remained perfectly still. For the first time, Brennan felt something he couldn't explain. Not recognition. Not yet. Just the strange sense that Walter Mercer wasn't looking at the base like a visitor. He was looking at it like a man remembering what had once stood there. Walter held Brennan's stare for a moment, then let his attention drift back toward the training field. The younger men expected an explanation. None came. That silence seemed to bother Brennan more than any argument could have. He extended one hand toward the leather satchel. "I need to know what is in the bag, Mr. Mercer." Walter glanced down at it. "Something that belongs here." "That is not an answer. It is the only one I have for you." One of the younger special warfare operators exchanged an amused look with the other. "Maybe he brought souvenirs," he said. Walter showed no reaction. Brennan stepped between him and the field. "Listen, sir. Nobody walks onto this installation because he has a memory and an old bag. If you served, I respect that. But this place runs on authorization, not nostalgia." Walter's eyes settled on Brennan again. There was no anger in them. Somehow, that made the words feel smaller after they were spoken. Brennan held out his hand. "Identification." Walter reached slowly into his jacket and produced a worn leather wallet. He removed a driver's license and placed it in Brennan's palm. Brennan studied it. "Walter James Mercer, Norfolk, Virginia." He looked up. 82 years old. Walter said nothing. "No military identification?" "Not anymore." "No visitor authorization?" "No, no appointment." "You already asked me that." A faint laugh came from behind Brennan. The old man remained still while the salt wind moved through his white hair. There was nothing about him that demanded attention, yet Chief Petty Officer Mark Holloway had begun watching from 30 feet away. Holloway had spent more than 20 years learning to notice details other men dismissed. Walter's clothes meant nothing to him. The satchel meant nothing. It was the old man's eyes that held him. Walter was not looking around with curiosity. He never stared at the buildings, never searched for signs. never appeared uncertain about where anything was. His gaze moved with familiarity. Brennan handed the license back. Who exactly are you here to see? Walter slipped the card into his wallet. No one. Brennan frowned. You said you came to keep a promise. I did. Then who was the promise made to? Walter's thumb brushed across the polished brass clasp of the satchel. For the first time, his calm expression carried the weight of something Brennan could not read. Robert Hale. The name meant nothing to Brennan. One of the younger men shrugged. Never heard of him. Walter looked toward him. You were not supposed to. The smile disappeared from the young man's face. A whistle sounded across the field. Walter turned immediately. A training team was moving through an exercise nearly 200 yards away. He watched for several seconds, head tilted slightly against the wind. They changed the approach, he said quietly. Brennan followed his gaze. Changed it from what? Walter seemed to realize he had spoken aloud. From the old way. Brennan folded his arms. And how would you know the old way? Walter looked across the compound toward the water, where sunlight flashed against steel and glass. Because some places change their buildings faster than they change their habits. 30 feet away, Holloway straightened. Something about those words reached backward through his memory, toward stories told by men whose names had disappeared from active rosters decades ago. He started walking toward them. Holloway stopped a few feet behind Brennan and studied Walter without introducing himself. The old man seemed to notice him anyway. His eyes shifted briefly toward the chief petty officer, measured him, then returned to the training field. Brennan caught the exchange. You know this man, Chief? Holloway shook his head. Never seen him before. Brennan gave Walter a thin smile. There you go. 20 years around naval special warfare, and even Chief Holloway has no idea who you are. Walter adjusted the leather satchel against his hip. I did not come here to be recognized. Across the field, another whistle sounded. A group of trainees moved toward a marked lane while an instructor called directions over the wind. Walter watched them for several seconds. They are compensating for the crosswind too soon. Brennan turned sharply. Excuse me. Walter nodded toward the training area. The wind coming off the water is stronger here than it is 70 yards downrange. They are reading what they feel instead of what they will meet. Brennan stared at him. You can tell that from here? Walter looked at a row of small flags beyond the course. You can tell it from those. One younger operator laughed. We have instruments for that now. Walter gave him a quiet nod. I can see that. There was no sarcasm in his voice, which somehow made the comment land harder. Holloway looked toward the flags. The nearest one pulled sharply inland. Farther down, another hung at a softer angle. Walter had noticed the difference without moving closer. Brennan stepped into his line of sight. All right, Mr. Mercer. You know how to watch flags. That still does not explain why you are here. Walter's gaze moved beyond Brennan toward an older concrete building near the water. That building used to have a different entrance. Holloway's expression tightened. When? Long time ago. How long? Walter did not answer. He looked toward a narrow service road running behind the structure. There was a maintenance shed there once. Green roof. The drainage was terrible whenever a storm came in from the east. Brennan glanced toward Holloway. Was there? Holloway hesitated. Before my time. Walter continued walking his eyes across the base as though layers of newer construction were transparent to him. The pier was shorter. Communications sat farther inland. Training started before sunrise because the fishermen complained about the noise. Holloway stopped breathing for half a beat. Those were not details tourists picked up from plaques. Brennan, however, heard only an old man trying to sound important. So you visited the base 40 years ago. Congratulations. Walter looked at him. More than 40. As what? No answer. Brennan's patience finally thinned. Were you Navy? Walter nodded once. Yes. Special warfare? Walter's fingers rested against the brass clasp of his satchel. Names were different then. The younger men exchanged looks. One muttered, Here we go. Brennan smiled without warmth. Let me guess. Classified. Walter said nothing. Secret missions? Records disappeared? Nobody alive to confirm the story. Holloway turned toward Brennan. That is enough. But Brennan had already committed himself. No, Chief. If Mr. Mercer wants us to believe he belongs here, let him give us something real. Walter's face remained calm. Brennan leaned slightly closer. Rank. Unit. Anything. Walter looked past him toward the ocean. Brennan followed with one final question, delivered with the casual amusement of a man certain He already knew the answer. Fine, old-timer. What was your call sign? Walter slowly turned back. The wind moved through the silence between them. His gray-blue eyes settled on Brennan. Sable 1. Behind Brennan, Holloway went perfectly still. For 2 full seconds, nobody spoke. The wind off the Atlantic filled the gap, rattling a loose halyard against a flagpole with a sharp metallic rhythm. Brennan glanced at Holloway and caught the change in the older man immediately. The chief petty officer was no longer casually observing Walter. His shoulders had squared. His eyes were fixed on the old veteran with an intensity that made Brennan's smile weaken. Sable 1. Holloway asked. Walter gave a single nod. One of the younger operators let out a short laugh. That is dramatic. Brennan recovered quickly. Come on, Chief. Anybody can invent a call sign. He looked back at Walter. Sable 1. Sounds like something from an old spy movie. The younger men chuckled again, but Holloway did not. Walter simply stood there with one weathered hand resting on the leather satchel. Brennan waited for him to defend himself. Walter offered nothing. What? Brennan continued. No story to go with it? No secret operation? No classified metal locked in a vault somewhere? Walter's eyes remained steady. You asked a question, and you gave me 2 words. 2 were enough. Brennan's jaw tightened. Not around here. Holloway turned toward him. Brennan. His voice had changed. Low. Controlled. Stop talking. That ended the laughter. Brennan stared at him. Chief. Holloway did not answer. Somewhere inside his memory, an old voice had begun speaking again. It belonged to Senior Chief Daniel Keating, an instructor Holloway had known nearly 25 years earlier. Keating had been from another generation, a man who rarely discussed the past and never decorated his stories with unnecessary details. But one evening, after training, he had mentioned a name. Not a real name. A call sign. Sable 1. Holloway remembered asking who the man was. Keating had stared into his coffee for a long time before answering. Someone you will never find in the photographs. Holloway had laughed then. He had been young. Keating had not. If you ever hear that call sign from the man who carried it, the senior chief had said, do not ask him what he did. Ask him who came home. Holloway had never forgotten the sentence. Though over the years he had assumed the story belonged to the mythology every military community collected around itself. Now an 82-year-old stranger stood 20 feet from the same shoreline, carrying a satchel older than some of the buildings around him. Holloway stepped closer. Mr. Mercer, I am going to ask you something. Walter studied him. Go ahead. Did you know Daniel Keating? For the first time since arriving, Walter's expression visibly shifted. His eyes softened. Danny Keating. Holloway felt the hair rise along his arms. Walter looked toward the water. He always hated being called Daniel. Brennan's confidence faltered. Holloway took another step. How did you know him? Walter's thumb moved once across the worn brass clasp. He was young when I knew him. Talked too much. Asked better questions than most. Holloway swallowed. He told me about Sable 1. Walter looked back at him. Then he told you more than he was supposed to. The compound suddenly seemed quieter. Holloway lowered his voice. He told me one other thing. Walter waited. He said there was a question only the real Sable 1 would understand. Brennan looked between them, no longer smiling. Holloway drew a slow breath. When the channel went quiet, who kept listening? Walter did not hesitate. Bobby Hale. His hand tightened around the satchel. And I promised him I would never stop. Holloway did not move. The answer had come too quickly, too naturally, without the slightest search for words. Brennan looked from Walter to the chief petty officer, waiting for someone to explain why the name Bobby Hale had changed everything. No explanation came. Holloway's mind had already traveled 25 years backward to that quiet evening with Senior Chief Keating. There had been one detail Keating refused to clarify. Bobby Hale. He had spoken the name once, then closed the subject as though a door had been locked. Chief, Brennan said carefully, what exactly is going on? Holloway ignored him. His eyes remained on Walter. Where did you hear that question? Walter asked. Senior Chief Keating. When? About 25 years ago. Walter gave the smallest smile. Sounds like Danny. He could keep a secret for 20 years, then give away just enough to make somebody curious. Holloway almost smiled back, but the weight in Walter's expression stopped him. Mr. Mercer, if you are who I think you are, Commander Cole needs to know you are here. Walter's gaze hardened slightly. I did not ask for a commander. No, sir. The word sir came differently now. Brennan heard it. So did the two younger operators. But I think he needs to know anyway. Walter looked toward the old concrete building near the water. I came to leave something. That is all. Holloway glanced at the satchel. Something for Robert Hale? Walter's hand settled over the worn leather. Something that belonged to him. Brennan finally stepped forward. His earlier amusement had vanished, replaced by uncertainty. Mr. Mercer, I owe you an apology if I crossed a line, but I still do not understand. Who was Robert Hale? Walter studied the younger man for a moment. A man who kept his word. And Sable one? Brennan asked. What does that mean? Walter's eyes shifted toward Holloway. Ask someone who needs to remember. Holloway understood. This was not a man waiting for an audience. Walter had spent decades avoiding one. The chief turned toward the duty building. Stay here. Brennan frowned. Chief, where are you going? To make a call. About what? Holloway stopped and looked back. About whether a story I heard 25 years ago just walked through our gate. He crossed the compound quickly. Inside the duty office, the air conditioning replaced the salt wind with a dry mechanical hum. A young duty officer looked up from his terminal. Chief, get command on the line. For what? Holloway leaned closer. Tell them we have an elderly visitor named Walter Mercer. The officer began typing. Nothing obvious appeared. I am not seeing anything unusual. You will not. Holloway looked through the window. Outside, Walter stood exactly where he had left him, small against the wide training field. Add the call sign. The officer's fingers paused over the keyboard. What call sign? Holloway lowered his voice. Sable 1. The officer entered it. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then his screen changed. He leaned closer. The casual expression vanished from his face. Chief. Holloway saw the color drain from him. What? The officer swallowed. This query did not return a record. Then what did it return? The young man slowly turned the monitor toward him. A single authorization notice filled the screen. Holloway read it twice. His pulse quickened. The message contained no biography, no service history, no photograph. Only an instruction. Contact command authority immediately. Do not delay the visitor. Holloway reached for the secure telephone. Get Commander Nathan Cole, he said. Right now. The secure telephone rang once inside Commander Nathan Cole's briefing room. He ignored it. Around the long table, 12 officers remained focused on the morning readiness schedule projected against the far wall. The telephone rang again. Cole stopped speaking. Calls on that line were rarely routine. He lifted the receiver. Cole. Several buildings away, Holloway stood beside the duty officer and watched the authorization notice glowing on the monitor. Commander, this is Chief Petty Officer Holloway at the East Training Compound. We have a visitor here. Cole glanced at the clock. Then process him through security. Sir, I think you need to hear this one yourself. Something in Holloway's voice made Cole straighten. Go ahead. His name is Walter Mercer. 82 years old. Virginia identification. No current military credentials. No scheduled appointment. Cole frowned. And why are you calling me? Holloway looked through the window. Walter remained outside with Brennan and the younger operators, his weathered hand resting on the old leather satchel. Because he gave us a call sign. Cole waited. Sable 1. The room seemed to change around him. The projected briefing continued silently across the wall, numbers and schedules moving to the next slide, but Cole no longer saw them. His fingers tightened around the receiver. For several seconds, he said nothing. The officers around the table began exchanging uncertain looks. Commander? Holloway asked. Cole lowered his eyes toward the polished tabletop. He had heard those two words only once before, nearly 3 decades earlier, when he was a young officer listening to an aging instructor speak after midnight. The story had been incomplete. No dates. No photographs. No official citation. Only a warning that some names survived because men remembered what paperwork could not preserve. Cole had dismissed half of it as legend. Until now. Say it again, he said quietly. Sable 1, sir. Cole stood. His chair rolled backward several inches across the floor. Keep him there. Yes, sir. Do not question him further. Do not search that satchel unless he offers it voluntarily. And Holloway. Sir. Cole looked around the room as though suddenly aware that everyone was watching him. Show him respect. He ended the call. Outside, Walter heard the distant rhythm of rotor blades and closed his eyes for a moment. The sound changed inside his memory. The clean Virginia morning faded beneath another sky, another coastline, another lifetime. He was young again, crouched beside a field radio under heavy rain while water ran from the brim of his cap. The equipment hissed with static. Voices came and disappeared beneath the weather. Somewhere beyond the darkness, Bobby Hale was waiting. Sable 1, do you copy? The transmission was weak. Walter pressed the handset closer. I copy. Channel is breaking up. Walter looked toward the men around him. They were exhausted, cold, and waiting for someone to sound certain. Walter made his voice steady. Then we keep listening. Static swallowed the reply. Minutes passed. Then a faint voice returned. Bobby, you still there? Walter answered without hesitation. I told you I would be. The memory loosened its grip. Walter opened his eyes. Brennan was standing several feet away now, no longer crowding him. Holloway emerged from the duty building and walked back across the gravel. Commander Cole is coming. Walter sighed softly. I was hoping he would not. Holloway stopped. You know him? Walter looked toward the command buildings. No, his thumb brushed the brass clasp of the satchel. But I knew the man who taught him why that name matters. Holloway studied Walter for a long moment. Who taught Commander Cole? Walter looked toward the water. A man named Thomas Rourke. Holloway's expression tightened. Rear Admiral Thomas Rourke had retired years ago, but his name still carried weight across naval special warfare. Brennan knew it too. You knew Admiral Rourke? He asked. Walter ignored the surprise in his voice. Before anyone called him Admiral. The younger operators had stopped pretending not to listen. The morning training continued around them, whistles sounding across the field, boots striking pavement, rotor noise drifting over the compound. Yet a strange pocket of stillness had formed around the old man. Brennan glanced at Walter's faded jacket and worn boots again. 10 minutes earlier, those details had looked like proof that he did not belong. Now they seemed to prove nothing at all. Holloway lowered his voice. What did Rourke tell him about you? I would not know. You never asked? Walter shook his head. Men remember what they need to remember. His fingers moved across the satchel clasp. The small metallic click carried him backward again. Rain. Darkness. Radio static. A younger Walter Mercer sat beside a field radio while Thomas Rourke, barely 23 at the time, leaned over a paper chart protected beneath clear plastic. Bobby Hale's voice faded in and out through the receiver. Their team had lost reliable communication, and the weather had erased every easy option. We cannot reach them, Rourke said. Walter listened to the static. Not yet. The channel is almost gone. Almost is not gone. Walter adjusted the frequency by touch, turning the dial a fraction at a time. He had learned long before that panic made men hear silence where patience could still find a voice. Then, beneath the hiss, 3 words emerged. Sable 1 listening. Walter lifted the handset. Always. Bobby's voice returned, weak but unmistakable. Walter gave him simple instructions, one landmark at a time, never raising his voice. No speeches. No promises he could not keep. Just direction. Wait. Listen. Move when certain. Rourke watched him through the rain, memorizing the calm more than the words. Hours later, when the channel finally cleared, Bobby Hale's voice came through stronger. We are coming home. Walter closed his eyes. Good. Keep coming. The memory dissolved beneath the sound of approaching footsteps. Walter blinked and found Holloway still watching him. Brennan had moved farther back, his earlier confidence replaced by something quieter. Mr. Mercer, Brennan said. I should not have laughed. Walter looked at him. You did not know. That does not make it right. No, Walter said. But it makes it fixable. Brennan absorbed that without answering. Holloway glanced toward the command building. Several figures had appeared outside. At their center was Commander Nathan Cole, moving across the compound with a pace that was controlled but unmistakably urgent. Conversations began dying as personnel noticed him. Cole passed the first training group without slowing. Then the second. His eyes searched ahead until they found Walter. He slowed. From 50 feet away, Walter saw recognition fighting disbelief on the commander's face. Holloway straightened. Brennan followed. The younger operators fell silent. Cole stopped several feet from Walter Mercer and stared at the weathered face he had known only through stories. His eyes dropped briefly to the old leather satchel, then rose again. Sir, Cole said carefully, I need to hear it from you. Walter understood. Sable 1. Commander Nathan Cole went completely silent. Cole said nothing for several seconds. Around him, the compound seemed to lower its own volume. Even Brennan noticed how the commander's face had changed. The authority was still there, but something older had surfaced beneath it. Respect mixed with disbelief. Cole finally drew a slow breath. Thomas Rourke told me you were gone. Walter's expression remained still. Rourke always preferred simple explanations. He said nobody had heard from Sable One in decades. That part is true. Cole looked at the weathered satchel. He also said if I ever heard that name spoken by the man himself, I was supposed to listen before I asked questions. Walter gave the faintest nod. That sounds more like him. Brennan shifted his weight. The embarrassment on his face was impossible to hide now. Cole noticed, but said nothing. There would be time for that later. His attention returned to Walter. Why are you here, Mr. Mercer? Walter's hand tightened around the satchel strap. Robert Hale. Cole's eyes narrowed. Bobby Hale. Walter looked at him more carefully. You know the name? Rourke mentioned him once. Only once. He stopped talking after that. Walter looked toward the Atlantic. Sunlight flashed across the water beyond the buildings, bright enough to make him squint. Some names cost more to remember. Cole waited. He understood instinctively that pushing would close a door that had taken 50 years to open. Walter finally lifted the satchel and placed it gently on a nearby bench. The leather creaked as he released the brass clasp. Brennan and the others watched, expecting documents, medals, perhaps something official enough to explain the commander's reaction. Walter reached inside and removed a small canvas pouch, faded nearly gray with age. He held it in both hands. The texture brought another memory forward. Rain-striking canvas. Radio static whispering through darkness. Bobby Hale's tired voice coming through the channel. Sable One, you still with me? Walter had answered immediately. Still here. If we make it back, I owe you a drink. You already owe me 3. Bobby had laughed. A brief sound carried through the static. Then keep the channel open. Walter remembered looking toward young Thomas Rourke beside him. Rourke had been exhausted, but listening carefully. How long do we stay? He had asked. Walter kept his hand on the radio. Until everyone who can answer does. That sentence had followed Rourke for the rest of his career. Walter returned to the present and opened his eyes. Cole was watching the canvas pouch. What is that? He asked. A promise that took too long. Walter loosened the drawstring and removed an old metal compass. Its casing was scratched, its finish dulled by decades, but 3 small letters were still visible on the back. Robert Hale's initials. Cole stared at them. Holloway lowered his eyes. Brennan's expression changed completely. Walter turned the compass once in his palm. Bobby carried this everywhere. Said a man should always know which way home was. Cole spoke softly. What happened to him? Walter closed his fingers around the compass. He lived a long life. Raised 2 daughters. Met 4 grandchildren. Buried his wife. Complained about his knees and refused to buy a decent fishing boat. A small smile touched Walter's face, then disappeared. He passed away 6 weeks ago. The wind moved across the compound. Walter held the compass toward Cole. Before he died, he asked me to bring this back here. Cole did not take it yet. Why here? Walter looked past him toward the young men, standing in silence. Because Bobby wanted the next generation to understand what brought us home. Walter kept the compass extended between them, but Cole still did not take it. The commander looked at the 3 worn initials on the casing, then toward the training field where men half Bobby Hale's age were beginning another exercise. What did he want them to understand? Cole asked. Walter turned the compass over in his palm. That equipment changes. Names change. Buildings change. The reason you bring people home does not. Holloway lowered his gaze. Brennan stood several feet away, listening without the confidence that had colored his voice less than an hour earlier. Walter continued quietly. Bobby used to say this compass never saved him. It only reminded him to stop pretending he knew where he was. Cole almost smiled. Rourke told a similar story. Rourke stole half his wisdom from Bobby. The faint humor vanished as Walter looked toward the water. The old compass seemed heavier in his hand, and memory returned with the soft click of its lid. Decades earlier, beneath a dark coastal sky, Walter had held that same compass while a weak radio signal faded beneath static. Thomas Rourke sat nearby, studying a damp map. Bobby Hale was somewhere beyond their sight, separated from them by miles of unfamiliar ground and failing communications. I cannot get a clean bearing, Bobby's voice said through the radio. Walter opened the compass. The needle trembled, then settled. Forget the clean bearing. Tell me what you can see. A pause followed. One ridgeline. Water to the east. Lights maybe 2 miles south. Walter glanced at Rourke. There. That is enough. Rourke frowned. Enough for what? Enough for the next step. Walter returned to the handset. He did not give Bobby a grand solution. He gave him one direction, then another. Each instruction was simple enough to trust. Each response confirmed they were still connected. Hours passed that way, measured not by clocks, but by voices returning through static. At one point, Rourke asked the question that would stay with him for decades. What happens if the radio goes completely quiet? Walter kept listening. Then you listen harder. Rourke stared at him. Walter tapped the compass. Silence does not always mean nobody is there. Near dawn, Bobby's voice finally returned clearly. Sable 1, I have the shoreline. Walter closed his eyes. Then you know the way. You stayed. I said I would. Bobby laughed softly. Remind me never to doubt you. Walter answered, just get home. The Virginia sunlight returned. Walter found himself standing beside the bench, the compass still open in his hand. Cole had not interrupted. Neither had anyone else. That was what Bobby remembered. Holloway asked. Walter nodded. Not some grand operation. Not the things people like putting into stories. He remembered a voice staying on the other end. Brennan looked toward the compass. And that is why he wanted it here. Partly. Walter closed the lid with a quiet click. There is something engraved inside. He handed it to Cole at last. The commander accepted it with both hands and opened the cover. His eyes moved across a short line etched into the inner surface, faded but readable. Cole stopped. Holloway watched his expression. What does it say, sir? Cole looked at Walter. Walter gave a small nod, allowing him to read it aloud. Cole's voice was quiet. No one comes home alone. The words settled over the group. Brennan looked toward the trainees across the field, then back at Walter. For the first time, he seemed to understand that Sable 1 was not remembered because Walter Mercer had wanted to become a legend. He was remembered because other men had refused to forget the voice that stayed with them when they needed it most. Cole closed the compass carefully. Mr. Mercer, this belongs somewhere every man here will see it. Walter shook his head. Not yet. Cole looked up. Walter reached back into the leather satchel. Bobby left one more thing.